Sorry everybody, it's Zyliks here, and welcome back to the Elysian League Power Rankings. This is week 3, and we had some interesting matches week 3. We're obviously going to be going over them. Keep in mind that these rankings do take the previous weeks into account, so if you won big and you feel like you should be higher, it's probably because your previous weeks weren't too great. And if you lost and you feel like you should have gone lower, it's probably because your previous weeks were pretty good. So yeah, we're going to start with our number 16th ranking. In the number 16 spot, we have Demonic in the Tampa Bay Rayquaza. Now, Demonic was 5-0'd by Yoda. I feel his team could have been built better. I would have liked to see, for example, Special Lucario instead of Physical. Volcarona had a decent matchup this week, but it didn't get brought, if I remember correctly. In all honesty, this team just needs some bulk with reliable recovery. Yes, there is the Gastrodon, but that's the only Pokemon that has like a reliable way of recovering. His only other Pokemon is the Cofagrigus, and its only way of recovery is through either leftovers or Pain Split, which Pain Split can get it some HP back, but it's not going to be, as easy as just clicking a recovery move. It's not that is going to solve all of his problems, but I feel like one of his biggest issues right now is he has nothing that can really switch into certain mons reliably and then like maintain HP. Because once things like Tyranitar get worn down, it's no longer really a bulky mon. And I feel like he's relying way too much on his lower tier offense, like Manectric, like the Gallade, to do offensive things, which isn't a bad thing, but he should be relying more on Kartana, on Hydreigon, on Lucario, on Volcarona, and maybe he should drop those lower tier mons for some more bulk. Definitely needs some more hazard removal, and yeah, so this team is staying at the number 16 position. In the number 15 spot, we have Zen in the Miami Mawile. Now, Zen, his team was looking like one of the best teams in the league. However, as we've seen over the first 3 weeks, he hasn't won any matches. Now, he probably should have won his first match, but there was a little bit of hacks. That being said, he would have had to avoid confusion a couple times to win, and he ended up losing 3-0 that week. I believe this week he lost 4-0 versus Aggron. I might be a little bit off on the differential. And the previous week he lost to Farook. So he hasn't been able to pick up a win. And I think it might be because his draft. Like, we looked at the draft originally and, it looks like a really good draft on paper. However, now that it's in practice, I feel he's lacking a lot of bulk that a lot of the other teams have. He doesn't have really any mons like with a good way of taking hits, recovering it, and that's mainly because of the way he's been building. Like, for example, he's run his Starmie seemingly offensive most weeks, whereas like a defensive Starmie with recover, leftovers, rapid spin, whatever, natural cure, you have yourself a bulky mon there. You have things like Audino, which can Wish Pass, which we have seen, but it's not like he's really taking too many hits with these mons, and we're seeing his offensive mons get worn down. We're seeing, even the defensive mons get worn down, and versus a team like Aggron's, who has quite a bit of offense, we just saw his team was kind of also offensive, like running webs and stuff, but in reality it didn't end up working out because Aggron's offense outshined it, whereas if maybe he brought a more defensive setup, he probably could have not lost, or at least not lost as bad. It's just kind of speculation though, but I think Zen needs to rethink the way he's team building and maybe make some potential team changes if he'd like to see some wins in the future. In the number 14 position, we have Riolu and the Toronto Mucks. Now this team is, I believe, 1-2, and the reason I have it so low is just because, like, the way he played this match was pretty poor. He barely won week 2. In week 1, he got, I believe, 6-0'd. I think he got 6-0'd again this week. I don't exactly remember. But anyways, his draft doesn't really have any switch-ins. We've seen a lot of teams take advantage of that so far. And speaking of switching, I think he forgot that you even can switch this match because he left a lot of Mons in and they just died. He left the Ludicolo in, it died. He left, I think, the Nidoqueen in until it died. It was just really poor playing. Like, he tried to set up on a Roarmon twice after Roar was revealed. The Hydra Vortex Z Crystal on Blastoise basically did nothing. As I've been saying, I don't like Blastoise as a Zmon. I think he needs to change that. Shuckle, it was able to take a few hits, but it was essentially setup fodder for the Zygarde, and it just, I don't know, his defensive Mons don't have any offensive pressure to scare out other offensive Mons or defensive Mons. Like, Chansey, for example, is setup fodder. Shuckle is setup fodder. Like, and he has Encore Mons, but, like, he's not using it, you know? Like, he can prevent setup, but he's not, I don't know. He's just not doing anything about it, and I just don't like the way he's been playing. This draft, as I've been saying from the start, needs some changes if you'd like to see improvement in future weeks. Number 13 spot, we have Yoda and the Chicago Cubchoo's. Now, Yoda traded away his Heracross for Vikavolt from the Cork City Cyndaquils, and I'm not a huge fan of this trade. However, it does give him Electric Stab, which he was previously missing, giving him the ability to do some slow Volt switches and potentially gain momentum with other offensive threats or defensive pivots. Unfortunately, I think that Heracross would have been a great Mon to Volt Switch into. However, I'm sure that Yoda probably has some plans moving forward with this trade that allow him to be successful in future weeks. Now, he did win pretty big 5-0 against Demonic, and a great battle for him, but he did really have the team matchup advantage from the start. Demonic sets that he brought didn't really have many ways of killing anything on Yoda's team, even if he did play correctly. And I do think that this team has the capability of rising in rankings, but I'd like to see more wins and better playing in future weeks. As right now, we've only seen this one win and some harsh losses in previous leagues, so I'm sure that Yoda will start climbing if he continues to win, but for now, he's staying around the bottom. In the number 12 position, we have Doric and the Kentucky Fried Combuskin. Now, this match was a little bit controversial. Now, I'm not going to get into the hacks right away, and I will, but just not yet. I'm going to talk about the early game first. So the early game was essentially Mudsdale versus Bronzong, Alomomola, and Charizard X. That was worded really weirdly, but those four Mons kept pivoting around. Now, essentially, the reason why this was happening is because a +2 Charizard OHKOs everything on their team except for Alomomola, but Alomomola is setup fodder for the Charizard. So basically what Doric needed to do was every time the Zard came in to try to set up, he would have to go Mudsdale, because Mudsdale can obviously live a +1 Flare Blitz and then hit back with an Earthquake. Now, the thing about this match that was kind of frustrating for me watching it is the Mudsdale was in Charizard range the entire time. The Charizard range, based on the calc, was around high 60s to low 80s, and the Mudsdale was hovering at around 70-ish. Most times it was against the Charizard once it got hit with the Toxic. Now, the reason why it was kind of frustrating for me is because had Farook just clicked Flare Blitz at any point in time, the Mudsdale could have died, and it would have died after toxic damage. So what would have happened is the Mudsdale would have gone down and the Charizard would have gone down. And had that happened, then the match would have been very different. Another big issue was I feel the way he was playing the Mudsdale was not amazing because he needed HP on the Mudsdale, and he was letting it get worn down. Now, eventually, he did make a good play by predicting the Zard to come back in, and he hit it with an Earthquake. The Zard was able to live because it didn't take any prior Flare Blitz recoil. But Doric could have avoided all of this if he took the time to set up Rocks. Like, I don't know why Rocks weren't set up. The match would have been very different had rocks been set up. Now, maybe he didn't want to bring the rocks because he thought, well, if I go for rocks and the Zard sets up, that's a problem. And it would have been, but had the rocks been there, the match would have been totally different. That's why I have him so low. Even though there was a lot of hacks, he should have had stealth rocks. Like, it would have changed the match in such a huge way. Now, Farook does have a lot of ways of clearing hazards. I believe he has 2 rapid spinners, maybe a defogger. I don't know off the top of my head. But now let's get into where the hacks started to happen. So Doric was able to put the Charizard to sleep. Now, the Charizard was asleep for the max amount of turns that it could have been asleep, which was unfortunate for Farook. That being said, the Zard was able to wake up, it got its health back, and then eventually Doric hit the Charizard with an Earthquake. It was able to survive, as I mentioned. Now, the Charizard could have potentially lived had the Celesteela not knocked it out with the Steel move. Had the Celesteela gone for either a Fire or a Grass move, the Charizard would have lived and been able to roost up. So, it was looking like Doric was playing pretty well at this point in time. He was able to get rid of the Charizard, which was a huge threat to his team. Again, if it got +2, the match was over. So he was able to get rid of the Zard, and it was looking like his match, as Farook's defense was worn down. He didn't really have any way of killing the Celesteela until he went into the Magneton. Now, the Magneton trapped the Celesteela, preventing it from switching with the Magnapole. He obviously did not have the leftovers, as he had the Assault Vest. Now, here's where things got a little weird, because let's go in a hypothetical or different situation here. Let's say the first Thunder Wave hit, because as we all saw in the match, Magneton goes for Thunder Wave versus Celesteela, and it misses, okay? Magneton takes damage, Magneton goes for Thunder Wave again, it hits. Celesteela gets paralyzed, Magneton does damage. Celesteela hits the Magneton, I think it lived, Magneton does more damage. Celesteela knocks out the Magneton, gets the Spadef boost, and then Greninja flinches it down twice and kills it with the Dark Pulse. Now let's live in a different scenario here. Let's say the first Thunder Wave hits the Celesteela, okay? Now, the Magneton gets to go for, I think, 3 Thunderbolts, maybe 4, before it gets knocked out, and then the Greninja's guaranteed to kill it with the Dark Pulse at that range. Unless he went for maybe some Giga Drains throughout. So, the reason why this is important is because, yes, there was hacks. The Celesteela got paraflinched down. But there was also hacks on Farook's side, because if Farook didn't miss the first Thunder Wave, it was very unlikely that Celesteela was going to break through Paralysis 4 different turns. And remember, Magneton had to go for Thunder Wave twice. If Magneton was able to not go for Thunder Wave twice, it would have been able to go for Thunderbolt a second time, adding another 20% damage. Basically what I'm trying to say is, it looks like there was hacks on Doric's side, but in actuality, there wasn't really, because there was also hacks on Farook's side. Like, Farook was basically guaranteed to kill the Celesteela if the first Thunder Wave hit. So, I don't really consider Farook killing the Celesteela hacks. Yes, again, there were paraflinches, and it was really unfortunate, but I don't know. I understand in the moment it's really upsetting losing because of that. And as we know, the rest of the match, Greninja just killed everything, right? Except I think Bronzong got a kill on like the Darmanitan. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. It was hacks, but at the same time, like, there's too many hypotheticals that you can't really call it hacks. And that's why I have this team so low, just because I feel Doric could have prepped better. He could have had rocks. He could have, you know, I don't know. He could have preserved the Celesteela. It might have made a bit of a difference. But again, obviously, you don't want the Greninja getting the Battle Bond boost, as the Almamola did not have any special defense investment, as it was found out later on when it got nearly O-code by the Greninja. Yeah, I don't know. I feel there should have been rocks, and that was a huge error from the Combusken's prep. Alright, so moving on from that long rant, we have Aggron here and the Cork City Cyndaquils in the number 11 position. Now, Aggron did make a few team changes. So first, he dropped his Tapu Lele in exchange for Tapu Koko. Now, Tapu Lele is arguably better than Tapu Koko. However, Tapu Koko gives him something that he did not have before, which is fast Volt Switch. Now, fast Volt Switch is amazing on a team that has huge offensive threats, like the Mega Aerodactyl, like the Heracross, like the Weavile. So Tapu Koko is definitely a huge plus versus Lele. The other disadvantage with Lele is Lele stops priority, and the Cyndaquils have quite a bit of priority, whether it's Aqua Jet Floatzel, Aqua Jet on the Empoleon, Ice Shard, Fake Out, and others on the Weavile. I don't know. I think the Aerodactyl might get Quick Attack. So it's like this team has quite a bit of priority, but it was getting hindered by the Lele. And I feel Koko is going to make quite a big difference. The only thing he has to worry out for is he does have quite a few electric weaknesses. Obviously, he does have ways of dealing with electric types, but giving the electric types a boost with the Koko could come to bite him later on, but I'm sure he'll play around it and he'll be aware of it. Another trade he made was he traded away his Vikavolt for Heracross. This is an amazing trade. I mean, potential Scarfmon with Heracross, status absorber, it's a huge wall breaker, and it can receive those Volt Switches from the Tapu Koko to either revenge Killmons or just break walls, all that stuff. All around better than Vikavolt for this team, in my opinion. Now, as far as this week goes, he finally did pick up a win. It was a pretty solid win. He utilized his offense well, scoring kills and a revenge kill. He pivoted around defensively well with Claydol, the Empoleon. He used the pursuit on Weavile to pick up 2 kills, I believe. And this team will most likely be going up in the rankings if Aggron continues to win. But currently it's still down here due to the past weeks. And I'm sure it'll make a pretty large jump if he's able to win again. In the 10th position, we have Haunter and the South London Sylveons. Now, this team is inheriting the score and the draft from the Manchestnut. Was it Manchestnut Skitty? I think that's what I don't remember the team name. I'm sorry, Kraft. I don't remember what your team name was. But anyways, so do keep in mind that this was not originally Haunter's draft. This was originally Kraft's draft. So he may not have it the way he wants it exactly, and he has mentioned that he's not a huge fan of this. So I'm sure once he's able to make some more changes, then he may do well in future weeks. So yeah, he did trade away the Zmon that he originally had, being Typhlosion, for Zoroark, which I think long term will be better, as it allows him to surprise his opponents and fire off a wide variety of Z moves. Since this is Showdown and not Cartridge, he'll be able to hide the identity of his Zoroark. Now, one thing about this is he does lose Fire Stab, but he does gain Dark Stab, which he originally only had with the Alolan Muck, but this allows him to have Dark on the special side or the physical side, depending on what type of set he wants to run, so people will have to think about that in team building. As far as his match this week went, he pretty much allowed his defensive mons to get worn down. He allowed Decidueye, probably the only way to kill Melodic, to get worn down, then eventually killed. He didn't invest EVs on Zoroark, which obviously, you know, he didn't intend on doing that, but it's a big team building error, and he has to make sure to check that stuff every week. I didn't like how at the end he let the Misty Terrain go down versus the Melodic, basically allowing Finny to get burned, where he could have potentially sacked the Zoroark and then reset the terrain with Finny, avoid getting burned, as well as potentially stalling out the Melodic. Now, obviously, stalling out a Melodic is pretty difficult, as it has access to those recovers, but it would have been nice to potentially see like Nature's Madness or something to do a bit more damage. I don't know exactly what set he was running on the Finny, and I don't think he properly recognized his win con. Potentially he forgot that Melodic has Haze, but he was trying to make his win con be the Necrozma, where I think his win con would have been better suited as the Decidueye. Another thing I wanted to point out is I feel the choice of 6 mons he brought weren't the best versus my team, as he did face me. But I think had he maybe brought things like the Alolan Muck to pass around some knockoffs, getting rid of leftovers, getting rid of, you know, potential like scarfs on things. I don't think I had any scarf mons, but you know, it's just knockoff is a great move. Alone Muck is a great mon, and I think it would have been pretty good that week, but it didn't get brought. Obviously, it is threatened by things like the Landorus and the Donphan, but it's just something to note. In the number 9 spot, we have Swagzire and the Green Bay Sandslashes. Now, this team has been going up and down quite a lot, but he is currently 1-2, and he wasn't able to stand up to Zack's team this week. I believe he got 5-0'd. He couldn't properly wear down his walls while his entire team was slowly dropping one by one, despite having like strong offensive ones like Entei, Raikou, Garchomp. You know, the defense on Zack's team was just too much for him to be able to beat. I do think that maybe in team building he probably should have had more offensive spreads on those mons, more offensive items, stuff like that. But you know, he didn't do it. Maybe he was thinking that he needed certain items to take on certain mons, but obviously, you know, hypotheticals, it's hard to tell what would have happened if he had a more offensive team, but I think the differential would have been a bit more out of Zack's favor. One other thing I want to mention is the defensive mons on this team are in a position where they don't really scare out opposing defensive mons. Like Slowbro, for example, you know, it's susceptible to getting toxicked, and it can get roared out easily if it tries to set up Calm Minds, and Togetic isn't really doing any damage to things. The only thing that Slowbro really scares out is like physical attackers that are not wanting to get Scald Burned, but you know, it's just, I feel that this team might need some changes where they can capitalize on defensive mons, because they have the offense to take on defense, but they don't really have the defense to take on defense, if that makes sense. In the number 8 spot, we have Farook and the Pittsburgh Pangoros. Now, I did talk a lot about this match whenever I was talking about Doric's ranking. However, this match was pretty intense the entire time, because if Farook ever got to +2 with the Zard, the match was over. Like, nothing he could do at that point would take a hit. The only thing that took a hit was, I think, the Alomomola, but he could just roost up and continue Dragon Dancing. So Alomomola was basically setup fodder. The reason why I feel Farook won, despite all the hacks, I did, again, talk about most of the hacks during the Doric part, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but I think the main reason Farook won was because of Doric's building. Doric did not bring rocks. He didn't really bring any way to status the Zard outside of he slept it once, but like, even then, it just, I don't know, like, he didn't really, even though the Zard didn't put in the work that it was going to, I feel that, like, it just, I don't know, it like, this match was so weird, because, like, Zard was basically going to win, and then it didn't win, and then Greninja just, like, destroyed everything, you know? Doric didn't have a single Specs Modest Greninja switch in, and while the Greninja was able to flinch down the Celesteela, and it did get the 3-hit Shuriken, which I don't really know exactly how Shuriken works once you hit Battle Bond. I know it changes a bit, but the 3 hits was definitely needed. I don't know if, like, what the chance of getting 3 hits is, but yeah, it was a really long match. Hacks is expected, especially whenever, you know, like, you're para-flinching things. Again, the T-Wave miss from the Magneton kind of sucked, as if he didn't miss T-Wave, he could have gone for another Thunderbolt, and then the para-flinches would not have mattered, because I already covered this. I don't want to beat a dead horse. Farook has won, I think he's 2-1 right now, and he's just showing that, you know, even whenever it's looking like he's going to lose, he can still pull off a game with Battle Bond Greninja. So it's just like, you can't sleep on Farook's offense. This stuff rips through teams. In the number 7 spot, we have Joey. So Joey, unfortunately, can't really ever win or lose fairly. It's kind of entertaining, but I'd like to see a match that Joey either wins or loses that isn't influenced by either misplays, hacks, rules, so he can actually receive a more accurate ranking, because his matches are very difficult to determine. All that aside, though, His Mega Pincer this week did put in quite a lot of work, barely surviving versus the Gardevoir and putting in quite a bit of damage. Had the Victini come in at the end and successfully hit blue flares, then it would have been Joey's game, but he did end up missing a blue flare and taking a 0-3 loss versus Cubchoo. Other than that, I wasn't a big fan of his early gameplay, but Cubchoo was being pretty offensive with setting up with the Omastar. So Joey did have to play a bit more defensive to try and stay in the match and stop that, and then eventually set up with Pincer. But yeah, if Joey could actually get a match where it isn't like the most narrow match 1-0 with like hacks, misplays, rules, then I could give him a real ranking. But so far it's like I have to base it off a lot of hypotheticals, and pretty much his team is like the last team I always rank, and it's like, oh well, this spot's open, so he's going there. Not really, but it's what it feels like with this team. So in the 6th spot, we have Cubchoo. Now, Cubchoo dropped Arrow and picked up Omastar, which I think is better for his team as it removes one of his many flying types, as well as it gives him a Mon that can set up a variety of hazards or set up like Shell Smashes and whatnot. He does lose the speed that Arrow has. However, it's not all that bad as the rest of his draft is pretty speedy, and Omastar is able to set up and gain speed with like Shell Smash and whatnot, or its abilities. And overall this season, Cubchoo has been playing decently well until the end game, I feel. This was another match that he probably should have lost, similar to week 1, but the main reason he's above Joey, which he did beat this week, is primarily differential, as his differential the weeks he's won has been higher than the weeks where Joey has won. I think a lot of his team building so far this season has been better as well. Like Shell Smash Omastar was cool as it was able to wear down the Murkrow's defense, like taking out things like the Registeel, doing quite a bit of damage to the Aromatisse. He was playing around the Mega Pincer pretty well with the Acid Armor boost, and he just barely missed out on a KO with Gardevoir. Tracing the Aerialate was pretty cool with the Gardevoir, and the defense passing was pretty cool too, despite the Gardevoir not being able to either live or get the KO, which basically allowed the Pincer to do even more damage to the Cobalion afterwards. Victini pretty much just won if it didn't miss, but it would have had to hit, I believe, 3 blue flares, so there's no real way of seeing exactly how it would have gone, but it technically would have been Joey's game had he hit, but as I said, he would have had to hit 3 times, so it's impossible to know what would have happened, but Joey probably would have had a better differential and most likely would have won had there not been hacks. In the number 5 spot, we have Erasmus and the... Yeah, I'm not even going to try to say it. So, Erasmus did lose this week. Pretty big loss versus Infinite, as it did shake up the conference a little bit that Erasmus is in. Now, as far as transactions go, he did drop his Breloom and picked up Superior as a Grassmon, and I feel it benefits his team a bit more than what Breloom would. While he does lose the ability to sleep Mons with Spore and have that fighting stab, he does gain a bit of a bulkier Grass type with the ability to abuse setup at the contrary, and it is a common trend for his team to have setup spam. So the more variety of setup he has, I feel will be better so that it's harder to prepare for. He also traded away his Zoroark for Typhlosion, which I think long-term will be helpful, even though I feel Zoroark did have a spot on this team. Typhlosion does give him Fire Stab, which he previously lacked, and it rounds out a bit of a Fire Water Grass core. Now, he does lose the ability to have a Dark type with Knockoff, because I do not know if Murkrow gets knockoff or not, but he does still have ways to knock off items with like the Landers, for example, so it's not a huge loss overall. Now, as far as this match versus Infinite went, he had absolutely 0 Chandelure switch-ins. Everyone on his squad was weak to Freeze Dry, except for the Magearna, which doesn't take an Earthquake from the Mamoswine. So, like, this was Mamoswine's matchup. Even though Mamoswine didn't get like all the kills like Chandelure did, Mamoswine like could have gotten all the kills had Chandelure not done it. Like basically Mamoswine and Chandelure killed everything on this team. it would have happened one way or another. Unfortunately, because of that, Erasmus was not able to get momentum as he couldn't switch in anything. I would have liked to see maybe some berries or potential assault vest mons to deal with things like the Chandelier, or berries to deal with things like the Mammoth, but it is kind of hard to prep for things like that, and it just wasn't really his matchup this week, and I'm sure that, we've seen him win in the past, and I imagine that he will continue to win. In the number 4 position, I have myself. Now, I played Hunter this week, and I pretty much controlled the match by preserving Melodic to take on a potential setup Necrozma, which did end up being the case. I was able to kill the Chomper and wear down the Finny with a big Sludge Bomb. I also was able to kill the Decidueye, which is probably one of the few ways that Hunter had of actually killing Melodic. And once that happened, the match was pretty much over. The Z Psyche thing didn't really matter too much as Venu wasn't even brought in the rest of the match anyways. It just would have helped differential a bit, and I did use Rotom Heat as a pretty good defensive pivot. And I honestly foresee myself continuing to win. I still feel a bit salty about week 2, and I think I'd be a higher ranking had that misclick not happen. But moving past that, I feel this match was a better showing of my capabilities using my draft. In the number 3 spot, we have Infinite and the Chicago Chandeliers. Now, as their team name would imply with Chandelier just bodied Erasmus. The Freeze Dry tech on Mammoth was absolutely brilliant to prevent things like Blastoise or potential Pyukumuku just coming in for free. Because he had the Freeze Dry, he was able to put the Blastoise in the Chandelier range, as well as really just threaten Blastoise from ever switching in, as at that point it couldn't. He did pivot around well with defensive Sylveon and defensive Scizor, and he kept his opponent on the back foot always, just like we saw in week 1, and that's, I feel, how Infinite's matches are going to go. In the future, he's going to be able to keep offensive pressure up as much as possible. We even saw, offensive Salamence, which I thought was a good bring. It did go down, but it definitely did its job, as I'm sure it did exactly what he wanted it to do. In the number 2 spot, we have Jack. So he's been winning by larger margins since week 1, and he did, I believe he 6-0'd Riolu, further proving that his defensive mons can take hits pretty well while still putting offensive pressure. So, for example, the Skarmory was able to take hits from the Ludicolo and then knock it out with a Brave Bird. As an example, Skarmory basically just sat there and took hits the whole match, and then eventually Zygarde cleaned up with a Dragon Dance. There really isn't much else to say about this team and their draft, other than, they've been pretty consistent, and I imagine that they'll stay towards the top unless we see some upset matches in the future. Coming in at number 1, we have Zack. Probably no surprise, but before we get into his rank discussion, I do want to mention that he dropped Swoobat for Passimian, and I can definitely agree with this move, as it gives him a lower tier mon that people have to think about when team building, which is very important, as well as an offensive fighting type, which is always a good thing to pack, and he didn't really lose much by dropping the Swoobat. Now, as far as his match went, his defensive mons pretty much just sat on the field, and they aren't pressured by anything really, as far as Swagzire's match went. If they are ever pressured, he just switches into a different defensive mon and then just continues sitting on the field. Another plus is his walls aren't incredibly slow, so they can force out opposing walls with offensive pressure, or even certain offensive mons with their own offensive capabilities, because things like Suicune, Heatran, Miltank, while they obviously aren't crazy offensive, they aren't necessarily passive, as they can either status mons or just threaten them with a bit of damage. But yeah, overall, we've seen this team just continue to win, and it's hard to tell at this point if it's, his draft just being so good, or maybe it's just the matchups he's had. As the season progresses, I'm sure we'll see more of, him facing different teams. Maybe he'll get some closer matches in there, but this was This was his first 5-0, so there's that. But yeah, I imagine we'll continue to see this team at the top or near the top of the rankings for quite a while. Alright, so that has been it for the Week 3 rankings. Make sure to let me know in the comments below if you agree with certain rankings or maybe your own personal rankings if you have them. I'll see you guys next time. My name is Xilicks. Okay, thanks, bye.